Welcome to Monk's Moon Temple. Just settle in. Find that position where your body feels held, where the blankets are exactly as warm as you want them, where your head rests comfortably. This isn't a lecture. This isn't a test. This is simply a space to rest and receive. From the busy streets of Mexico City to the quiet countryside of Scotland, people are lying down just like you, ready to lay down something heavy they've been carrying far too long. Have you ever woken up after 8 hours of sleep feeling completely exhausted? Not the good tired after physical work, but that heavy, groggy feeling that makes you wonder if something's wrong with you. Your body rested. Your body repaired cells, consolidated memories, restored energy. But your mind never clocked out. It worked the night shift while you slept. What was it doing all night? It was running simulations. Replaying conversations from yesterday, trying to figure out if you said the right thing. Running previews of conversations you might have tomorrow, preparing perfect responses so you won't look foolish. Scanning for threats to your reputation, your image, your standing. Comparing your life to people you haven't thought about in years. Defending positions you hold against imaginary opponents. Working tirelessly protecting something that doesn't actually exist as a solid, permanent thing. The Buddha observed this pattern 26 centuries ago. He watched kings and servants, merchants and monks, all trapped in the same exhausting cycle. He saw that human beings suffer not primarily from external circumstances, but from an internal mechanism that clings, defends, compares, and constructs. A mechanism that creates a sense of self and then spends every waking moment trying to protect that self from threat. Modern psychology confirms this. Your brain has a default mode network that becomes active when you're not focused on any task. This is the part that wanders, ruminates, tells stories about who you are. When it's hyperactive, you experience more rumination, more self-critical thoughts, more comparison. More suffering. The Buddha would say you're experiencing more clinging to the illusion of a permanent self. This is why you can sleep 8 hours and wake up exhausted. Your mind kept working the night shift on a job that doesn't actually need to be done. Because the self you're defending, the image you're maintaining, the reputation you're protecting, none of it is as solid or real as you believe. Let's look directly at this mechanism. Not to fight it, not to eliminate it through force. Just to see it clearly. Because the Buddha taught that seeing clearly is itself the liberation. You don't need to defeat your ego. You just need to see that it's a process, not a thing. And in that seeing, something shifts. The grip loosens. The exhaustion begins to lift. When was the last time someone criticized you? What happened in your body? Before you processed whether the criticism was valid, before you decided how to respond, what was the immediate physical sensation? For most people, it's a tightening. The chest constricts. The jaw clenches. The shoulders rise. This happens in milliseconds. Your nervous system detected a threat and went into protection mode. But what was the threat? Not your physical safety. The threat was to your identity, to the image you've spent years constructing. The Buddha called this identity Sakkayaditthi, the view of self. It's the deep belief that there's a solid, permanent entity inside you that is the real you. This entity can be damaged by criticism, enhanced by praise, diminished by failure. It needs constant maintenance, constant defense. And the Buddha made a radical claim. He said this solid, permanent self doesn't exist. Not that you don't exist, but that this permanent entity you believe yourself to be is a construction, a story, a collection of habits mistakenly perceived as a thing. Think about your body. The cells that make up your body right now are not the cells from 7 years ago. Every cell has been replaced. Your body is a river of constant change. Your thoughts change constantly. The thought you had 5 minutes ago is gone. Your emotions flow like weather. Your beliefs shift over time. Where in all this constant change is the solid, permanent you? You can't find it because it's not there as a thing. It's there as a process. I once met a woman who spent 15 years as a corporate lawyer. She built her entire identity around being sharp, competitive, successful. When she walked into a room, she commanded attention. She was, by all external measures, exactly who she had worked to become. Then she burned out. Not gradually. Suddenly. One morning she woke up and couldn't get out of bed. Her body worked fine. Her mind worked fine. But the engine that had driven her for 15 years, the constant performance of being a successful lawyer, had simply stopped. She spent months in therapy, in confusion. Then a therapist asked her a question that changed everything. Who would you be if you weren't a lawyer? She had no answer. Her identity was so completely fused with her role that separating them felt like contemplating her own death. Over years, she slowly untangled herself from the image she had built. She started noticing when she was performing versus when she was simply being. She started seeing that the exhaustion wasn't from the long hours. The exhaustion was from the constant work of being someone, from the endless performance of an identity she had mistaken for herself. If this resonates with you, please take a moment to subscribe to Monk's Moon Temple. Hit the subscribe button below, and let's continue this journey together. Let's go deeper into this first prison, the prison of performance. Every morning you wake up and put on not just clothes, but a character. At work, you perform competence, nodding along even when projects feel confusing, hiding uncertainty behind confident phrases you've learned to use. With friends, you perform ease, making sure your struggles don't show too much, your vulnerabilities stay carefully managed. With family, you perform the version of yourself they expect, the one who has it together, who doesn't need help, who is handling life exactly as they hoped you would. Online, you perform authenticity, selecting which honest moments to share, which flaws make you relatable without making you lesser, which struggles prove you're real without proving you're failing. This performance requires constant vigilance. Did I say the right thing in that meeting? Did they notice when I didn't understand? Am I coming across as too eager, too aloof, too confident, too uncertain? The questions never stop because the image you're maintaining is fragile, constructed, requiring constant adjustment to keep intact. You might think this is just normal social awareness, being appropriate in different contexts. But notice what happens in your body when someone questions your competence. The immediate tightness. The rush of defensive words forming before you've even heard their full sentence. The way your mind races through justifications, explanations, evidence that you're not what they're suggesting. That reaction isn't about the actual criticism. It's about protecting an image you've spent years constructing. The Buddha saw that this image you're defending isn't even real. It's a construction, a story, a collection of ideas about who you are that you've mistaken for your actual self. And this becomes clear when you meet someone who stops defending and discovers what happens next. There was a man I encountered during a retreat in the Pacific Northwest. He was a former military officer, someone who had spent 20 years in a culture built entirely on image, on rank, on knowing your place and performing your role flawlessly. He had retired and decided to explore meditation, mostly because his wife kept telling him he needed to relax. He came to the retreat with the same attitude he'd brought to everything in his life, as a mission to be accomplished, a challenge to be conquered. He sat perfectly upright, focused intensely, took copious notes. He was going to master meditation the way he'd mastered everything else. On the third day, the teacher gave an instruction that broke him open. She said, "For this next hour, stop trying to be a good meditator. Stop trying to get it right. Just sit here and be a complete failure at meditation. Let your mind wander as much as it wants. Slump your posture. Daydream. Fall asleep if you need to. For 1 hour, give yourself full permission to be the worst meditator in the history of this retreat center." The man later described what happened. At first, his mind rebelled. That's not how you do things. That's not how you succeed. But he decided to follow the instruction as an experiment. He let his posture soften. He let his mind do whatever it wanted. And within about 20 minutes, something shifted. The constant pressure he'd been carrying, the pressure to perform meditation correctly, to be seen as a good practitioner, to master this new skill, it all dropped away. For the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, he wasn't performing. He was just sitting there, being alive, with no agenda, no image to maintain, no rank to protect. He said it was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Terrifying because he didn't know who he was without the performance. Liberating because for the first time, he wasn't exhausted. He had touched something underneath all the effort, a basic okayness that had nothing to do with getting it right. This is what the Buddha pointed toward. Not that you should abandon all social grace or stop caring about how you affect others. But that the constant work of image maintenance is optional. It's a habit you can see through. And when you see through it, you discover that underneath all the performing, there's simply awareness itself, aware of itself, at peace for no reason at all. Think about how much energy you spend managing how you appear. In a single conversation, your mind is doing dozens of calculations. Am I talking too much? Too little? Is this story interesting? Are they bored? Should I ask them a question now? What will they think of me if I share this? All of that mental activity is exhausting. And none of it is necessary for genuine connection. In fact, it often prevents genuine connection because you're so busy managing the performance that you're not actually present with the person in front of you. The Buddha taught that genuine connection, genuine peace, genuine freedom arise not from perfecting your performance, but from dropping it entirely. Not from becoming a better version of the character, but from seeing that you were never just a character to begin with. You are the awareness in which all characters arise and pass away. There's a simple experiment you can try right now. Bring your attention to your breath. Just one breath. Notice the sensation of air entering your nostrils. Notice the slight pause. Notice the air leaving. For this one breath, there is no need to perform. There is no competent or incompetent version of you breathing. There is no good meditator or bad meditator. There is just breathing, happening all by itself, without any effort from the character you usually think you are. That's a taste of freedom. That's what's available when the performance stops, even for a single breath. Now let's look at the second prison, the prison of comparison. This is a prison built from a question you ask hundreds of times each day without even realizing it. How do I measure up? Not against your own values or genuine aspirations. Against everyone else. Their achievements, their appearances, their relationships, their success. You wake up and before your feet touch the floor, your mind is already calculating. Your colleague got promoted. Are you falling behind? Your friend posted vacation photos. Why isn't your life that beautiful? Someone younger achieved something you haven't. What does that say about you? This measuring never stops because there's always someone doing better in some area. Always someone richer, more attractive, more successful, more spiritually advanced. And always someone doing worse, which provides temporary relief until you remember that downward comparison just proves you need comparison to feel okay. You're on a treadmill that never stops. The faster you run, the more you realize you're not getting anywhere. The Buddha saw this pattern clearly in every village he visited. Human beings trapped in an endless cycle of measuring themselves against each other, finding either inadequacy or superiority, neither of which brought actual peace. He taught that when your attention is consumed by comparison, it's not available for the actual work of understanding your own mind. You're too busy looking sideways to look inward. What's remarkable is how invisible this bondage feels. Comparison seems like natural awareness, helpful information, reasonable assessment of where you stand. It doesn't feel like a cage until you meet someone who discovered what happens when you stop comparing entirely. I remember a story about two musicians who studied at the same conservatory. The first was extraordinarily gifted. She could hear a complex piece once and play it back perfectly. Teachers praised her constantly. She was invited to perform at prestigious venues while still a student. The second was competent but not exceptional. He practiced longer hours, struggled with difficult passages, received polite encouragement but none of the adulation that flooded toward his classmate. For years, the second musician suffered terribly from comparison. Every concert he attended featuring his gifted classmate felt like a personal failure. Every praise she received registered in his mind as implicit criticism of himself. He considered quitting music entirely because he couldn't bear the constant reminder that someone else was better. He tried to force himself to feel happy for her success. He tried to convince himself that talent didn't matter. He tried to suppress the jealous thoughts when they arose. Nothing worked. The comparing continued, now with the added suffering of feeling like a bad person for comparing. Then one day, years after they'd both graduated and gone their separate ways, he heard her perform again. She had become exactly what everyone predicted, a world-renowned soloist with a brilliant career. He sat in the audience, and the old familiar feelings began to rise. But something was different this time. He had been practicing, not music, but attention. He had been learning to watch his mind without getting swept away by every thought. So when the comparison thoughts arose, he didn't try to fight them or believe them. He just watched them. He noticed the physical sensations, the tightness in his chest, the heat behind his eyes. He noticed the story his mind was telling, that her success meant his failure. And for the first time, he saw that the story wasn't true. It was just a story, a mental habit, an interpretation he had been adding to simple facts. The fact was she played beautifully. That was all. The rest, the meaning about his worth, about his life being lesser, about failure and success, all of that was comparison suffering layered on top of reality. In that moment, something shifted. he didn't stop appreciating her talent. He appreciated it more fully because his appreciation wasn't tangled up with measuring himself against her. He could simply hear the music, beautiful music played by a gifted human being, and be glad it existed in the world. His own relationship to music transformed that night. He stopped playing to prove something or to measure up. He started playing because he loved music. And ironically, that shift made him a better musician than he'd ever been when he was trapped in comparison. This is what the Buddha taught. Freedom comes not from winning the comparison game, but from seeing that comparison itself is optional. It's a habit, not a requirement. And like any habit, it can be seen through, understood, and gradually released. Think about how much energy you spend on comparison in a single day. Scrolling through social media, measuring your life against curated snapshots. Walking into work, calculating how your achievements stack up against colleagues. Talking with friends, silently comparing your problems to theirs to determine whose life is harder. All that energy could flow into actually living your life, into experiencing what's here without the constant measuring, into developing your genuine capacities instead of tracking how they compare to others. What would one day feel like without comparison? Not trying to be better than others. Not consoling yourself that you're not worse. Just experiencing your own life on its own terms without the measuring stick. This isn't about lowering standards or abandoning growth. It's about recognizing that the entire framework of comparison is something your mind constructed and your mind can release. Now let's look at the third prison. This one is built from ideas you never chose but defend as if your life depends on them. You have political opinions you inherited from your parents without ever examining whether they align with your actual values or observations. You hold beliefs about success that came from movies and advertisements, not from investigating what actually brings you satisfaction. You carry assumptions about relationships that you absorbed from the culture around you, never questioning whether they're true or helpful. And yet, when someone challenges these borrowed thoughts, you react as if they're attacking your identity. Your body tenses. Your mind races to find counterarguments. Your throat tightens with the urgency to defend something you didn't even consciously choose to believe. This happens because over time, the opinions you've carried become inseparable from how you understand yourself. You're not just someone who holds conservative views or progressive views. You are a conservative or a progressive, and questioning the views feels like questioning your existence. You're not just someone who values financial success. You are someone whose worth is measured by achievement, and doubting that belief feels like losing solid ground. The Buddha saw this pattern everywhere he traveled. People clinging desperately to beliefs they'd inherited from family, culture, religion, teachers. Beliefs they'd never actually investigated but would fight to protect. And he saw how this clinging created immense suffering, not because the beliefs were necessarily wrong, but because holding them without examination turned them into prisons. I once worked with a man who had built his entire identity around being an atheist. He was brilliant, well-read, could dismantle religious arguments with surgical precision. He had debates memorized, knew all the logical fallacies, could quote scientific studies for hours. His atheism wasn't just a position. It was who he was. It separated him from his religious family, gave him a community of like-minded skeptics, provided a framework for understanding the world. Then something unexpected happened. His young daughter nearly died from a sudden illness. She survived, recovered fully, but during those terrifying days in the hospital, he found himself praying. Not believing in anything, just praying, some desperate instinct rising from somewhere deeper than his carefully constructed arguments. Afterward, he was flooded with confusion and shame. He had betrayed his identity. He had done something that contradicted everything he believed about himself. For months, he tried to explain it away, to fit it back into his worldview, to dismiss it as evolutionary biology or stress response. But the experience wouldn't leave him. It had opened a crack in the wall of his identity, and through that crack, he began to see something uncomfortable. His atheism wasn't just a reasoned conclusion. It was also an identity, a tribe, a way of distinguishing himself from others. It served psychological needs he hadn't acknowledged. This realization didn't make him religious. He didn't suddenly start attending church. But it softened something. He stopped needing to defend his position so aggressively. He could listen to religious friends without immediately preparing counterarguments. He could hold his own views more lightly, as current understanding rather than absolute truth. The freedom wasn't in changing his mind about God. The freedom was in no longer needing his mind to be permanently made up about anything. The Buddha addressed this directly with a group of people who were drowning in exactly this confusion. They had been exposed to an endless parade of contradictory teachers, each claiming absolute truth, each dismissing all others as deluded. The people were exhausted, not knowing what to believe anymore. When the Buddha arrived, they expected him to do what every other teacher had done, proclaim his teaching superior, demand faith in his authority. Instead, he said something that shocked them. He told them not to believe anything simply because it's been repeated often. Not to believe anything because it's written in sacred texts. Not to believe anything because it seems logical. Not to believe anything because it agrees with your current views. Not to believe anything because the speaker seems credible. Not even to believe something just because he, their teacher, said it was true. Then he gave them something far more valuable than another belief system. He gave them a method. Investigate for yourselves, he said. When you act from greed, what actually happens in your direct experience? Does it lead to your well-being or to suffering? When you act from hatred, what is the actual result in your own body and mind? When you act from delusion, from not seeing clearly, what is the fruit of that? Don't take anyone's word for it. Look directly. Verify through your own experience. This is radically different from how most people approach beliefs. Usually, we find a position that feels comfortable, that fits with our group, that confirms what we already think, and then we spend our energy defending it. The Buddha was inviting something else entirely. Hold all beliefs lightly enough to examine them honestly. Be willing to be wrong. Be more interested in truth than in being right. Think about a belief you hold strongly. Maybe it's political, maybe religious, maybe about health or parenting or success. Have you ever really investigated it? Have you looked at evidence that contradicts it with genuine curiosity rather than defensive dismissal? Have you asked yourself what psychological needs this belief serves beyond being true? Have you considered that you might be defending something you never actually chose? The energy it takes to defend unexamined beliefs is enormous. The anxiety of being on the right side. The anger toward people who disagree. The guilt when your own experience contradicts what you're supposed to believe. All of that can drop away, not through finding better beliefs, but through learning to hold all beliefs more lightly, as working hypotheses rather than absolute truths. This is the freedom the Buddha offered. Not a new set of doctrines to replace old ones, but a way of relating to all doctrines that doesn't imprison you. Let's now enter the fourth prison, the deepest one, the one that contains all the others. This is the prison of the permanent self. The belief that there's a solid, unchanging you inside your head, a little CEO, a permanent resident who is having all these experiences, who owns your thoughts, who is the subject of your life story. This belief feels so obvious, so self-evident, that questioning it can seem absurd. Of course there's a me. I'm right here. I've been me my whole life. What else would I be? But the Buddha made a radical claim. He said this permanent, independent self you take yourself to be is an illusion. Not that you don't exist. You clearly exist. You're here breathing, experiencing, reading these words. But the way you experience yourself, as a solid, continuous, independent entity, is a misperception. You are not a thing. You are a process. You are a river, not a statue. Think about a river. You look at the Mississippi River and you think of it as the same river it was 100 years ago. But the water flowing past St. Louis today is not the same water that flowed past a century ago. The riverbed has shifted, the banks have changed, the ecosystem has transformed. In what sense is it the same river? It's the same only as a convenient designation, as a name we apply to a continuously changing process. The river is a verb, not a noun. It's a flowing, a constant becoming. You are exactly the same. The cells of your body are constantly dying and being replaced. The you from 7 years ago had an entirely different set of cells. Your thoughts are constantly changing. The thought you had 5 minutes ago is gone forever. Your emotions flow like weather, appearing based on conditions, disappearing when conditions change. Your beliefs shift over time as you learn and experience new things. Your personality, which feels so solid, is actually a collection of habits that can and do change. Where in all this constant flux is the permanent, unchanging you? You can't find it because it's not there as a thing. It's there as a process, as a flow, as a convenient designation for a constantly changing collection of experiences. The Buddha used a simile that was brilliant in its simplicity. He said the self is like a chariot. When you look at a chariot, what do you find? Do you find the wheels? Yes. The axle? Yes. The seat? Yes. The pole? Yes. The reins? Yes. But do you find a separate entity called chariot apart from all these parts? No. Chariot is just a convenient name we give to these parts working together. Remove the wheels and it's no longer a chariot. Replace the axle and the parts have changed, but we still call it a chariot. The chariot isn't a thing. It's a process, a collection, a conventional designation. You are the same. There are physical processes, sensory experiences, perceptions, thoughts, emotions, consciousness. All of these are arising and passing constantly. But there is no separate entity called you apart from these processes. You are not the owner of experiences. You are the experiencing itself. You are not the thinker of thoughts. You are the thinking itself. You are not the feeler of feelings. You are the feeling itself. This isn't just philosophy. This has practical implications for your exhaustion. Because when you believe in a permanent self, everything becomes personal. Every criticism feels like an attack on your very existence. Every failure feels like proof that you are fundamentally flawed. Every success becomes desperately important because it validates that you are okay. You spend your entire life defending, enhancing, and protecting something that was never actually there as a solid thing in the first place. I once knew a man who lived in constant anxiety about his legacy. He was wealthy, successful, had built a company from nothing. But he couldn't enjoy any of it because he was obsessed with what would happen after he died. Would people remember him? Would his name live on? Would his grandchildren know what he accomplished? He spent millions on buildings with his name on them, on foundations that would carry his work forward, on biographies that would tell his story. He was trying to make the self permanent, trying to extend its existence beyond death. Near the end of his life, a friend asked him a simple question. When you're gone, who will care about your name? He was stopped cold. He realized that his obsession with legacy was just the ego trying to survive, trying to find a way to continue after the body died. But the self that wanted to continue, that was just a collection of thoughts and memories and accomplishments. It wasn't a thing that could survive. It was a process that would end when the conditions supporting it ended. This realization didn't make him depressed. It made him free. For the first time, he could enjoy his life without the desperate need to make it permanent. He could appreciate his accomplishments without needing them to be remembered forever. He could love his grandchildren without needing them to carry his memory. He stopped trying to build monuments to himself and started actually living. The energy he had spent trying to make the self permanent was now available for simply being alive. This is what the Buddha pointed toward. Not that you should become nothing or lose your identity, but that the identity you've been desperately protecting was never as solid as you thought. And when you see this clearly, the protecting can stop. The defending can stop. The exhausting work of maintaining a permanent self can finally rest. Let me tell you about a woman who discovered this truth in a way she never expected. She was a surgeon, one of the best in her city. She had spent 15 years training, sacrificing, pushing herself to achieve a level of skill that few ever reach. Her hands could do things that seemed almost magical. She could repair damage that others thought irreparable. She saved lives regularly, and she knew it. Her identity was built entirely on being the one who could fix things, the one who stayed calm under pressure, the one who made the right call when everything was falling apart. Then her own body betrayed her. A minor tremor developed in her right hand, the hand she used for surgery. At first it was barely noticeable, just a slight shakiness when she was tired. She ignored it, compensated, told herself it would go away. But it got worse. Within a year, she had to stop operating entirely. The thing that defined her, the skill that made her who she was gone. She fell into a darkness she had never experienced. She had helped so many people, saved so many lives, and now she couldn't even help herself. She didn't know who she was without the surgeon's identity. She had been the surgeon for so long that she had forgotten there was anything else. Her marriage, already strained by years of dedication to work, collapsed. Her friends, mostly colleagues, didn't know how to relate to her now that she was no longer one of them. She was alone, untethered, floating in an identity void. In desperation, she started seeing a therapist who also practiced mindfulness. The therapist didn't try to fix her or cheer her up. Instead, she asked a question that seemed almost cruel at first. Who would you be if you were not a surgeon? The woman had no answer. The therapist asked her to sit with that question, not to find an answer, but to feel the discomfort of not having one. To feel the terror of not knowing who she was. Week after week, she sat with that question. And slowly, something began to shift. She started noticing moments when she wasn't performing the identity of surgeon. When she was simply drinking tea and noticing the warmth of the cup. When she was walking in the park and noticing the light through the leaves. When she was talking with someone and actually listening instead of thinking about work. In those moments, she wasn't the surgeon. She was just alive, just present, just aware. And in those moments, she wasn't suffering. She began to see that the suffering came not from losing her career, though that was genuinely painful. The suffering came from losing the identity she had attached to that career. The suffering came from believing that she was the surgeon, and now that the surgeon was gone, she was nothing. But the moments of simple presence showed her something else. The awareness that noticed the warmth of the cup, that noticed the light through the leaves, that awareness was still there. It had always been there, even when she was operating, even when she was saving lives. It was the background of all her experience, the screen on which the movie of her life played. And that awareness hadn't been diminished one bit by the tremor in her hand. This is what the Buddha meant when he talked about the unconditioned, the deathless, the aspect of experience that isn't touched by change. He wasn't talking about a soul or a permanent self. He was pointing to awareness itself, the capacity to know, the simple fact of being conscious. This awareness doesn't get better with success or worse with failure. It doesn't increase with praise or decrease with blame. It doesn't change at all. It's simply the space in which all changing experiences appear and disappear. The surgeon, now no longer a surgeon, began to explore this. She started meditating regularly, not to achieve anything, but just to familiarize herself with this awareness that had always been present but overlooked. She discovered that resting in awareness, even for moments at a time, brought a peace deeper than anything her surgical career had ever given her. That peace didn't depend on being anyone or achieving anything. It was simply the peace of being alive, of being conscious, of being present. She eventually found new work, teaching anatomy to medical students. She was good at it, but she no longer needed it to define her. She could enjoy it without being attached to it. When students praised her, it was pleasant but not essential. When they criticized, it was information but not destruction. She had discovered that underneath all the identities she had worn, there was simply awareness, awake and at peace. And that awareness was enough. Think about your own life. What identities are you attached to? Parent, professional, artist, activist, provider, partner. What would happen if those were taken away? Not necessarily taken away permanently, but imagine for a moment that they shifted, that you were no longer able to perform those roles. Who would you be? The question isn't meant to depress you. It's meant to help you see that you are not those roles. You are the awareness that experiences those roles. The roles come and go. The awareness remains. The freedom the Buddha taught isn't about becoming a better person. It's about seeing that you were never just a person to begin with. Person is a role, a costume, a temporary arrangement. What you are, what has always been here, is something far more vast, far more peaceful, far more free. And that doesn't need defending because it was never threatened. Now we arrive at the final teaching, the one that brings everything together. How do you actually let go? You've seen how defending a self-image creates exhaustion. You've seen how comparison traps you in endless measuring. You've seen how unexamined beliefs become prisons. You've seen how clinging to a permanent self generates constant anxiety about protecting something that isn't even there. But knowing these things intellectually doesn't automatically free you from them. You can understand perfectly that comparison creates suffering and still find yourself measuring your worth against others the moment you open social media. You can see clearly that borrowed beliefs imprison you and still feel defensive when someone challenges your views. So the question becomes, how does understanding actually transform into freedom? Most people approach this the same way they approach everything else in their lives. Through effort, through force, through willpower. They try to let go the way they try to lift a heavy weight, through gritting their teeth and pushing harder. I shouldn't care what people think. You tell yourself firmly, trying to force yourself into not caring. I need to stop comparing. You command, attempting to willpower your way out of a lifetime habit. I must release my attachments. You insist, using all your strength to push away the very things you're clinging to. But this approach has a fundamental problem. The trying itself is more ego activity. The ego trying to fix the ego. The self trying to eliminate the self. Using force to overcome attachment is like trying to make yourself fall asleep by commanding yourself to sleep harder. The effort itself prevents the very thing you're trying to achieve. The Buddha taught something more subtle, more patient, more aligned with how transformation actually happens. He taught that genuine letting go isn't forced. It emerges naturally when the right conditions are present. Think about a garden. You cannot force a seed to become a plant. You cannot pull the sprout from the soil and command it to grow. But you can create conditions. You can prepare the soil, add nutrients, water regularly, ensure adequate sunlight, protect from pests. Then you wait. The growth happens on its own, in its own time, without the seed needing to understand the process. Your job is not to make the plant grow. Your job is to create conditions and trust the process. Letting go of ego clinging works exactly the same way. You cannot force yourself to be free. But you can create the conditions in which freedom naturally arises. What are those conditions? First is the condition of honest observation. This means watching the ego's games without judgment, without trying to change them, just seeing them clearly. When you feel the flash of defensiveness, don't berate yourself for being defensive. Just notice it. Ah, there it is. The ego feels threatened. When you feel the pang of envy, don't try to instantly convert it into gladness for the other person. Just notice it. Ah, there's comparison. This simple act of noticing, without getting caught in the story, is like turning on a light in a dark room. The shadows don't disappear, but you see them for what they are. And seeing them weakens their power. Second is the condition of wise association. The people you surround yourself with are powerful conditioning forces. If you spend your time with people who are constantly competing, comparing, and performing, your mind will naturally do the same. If you spend time with people who are genuine, kind, and not caught up in image management, their way of being will begin to influence you. You don't have to abandon your friends, but you can consciously seek out the company of those who embody the peace you seek. Third is the condition of mindful consumption. This goes far beyond food. What are you feeding your mind? Are you consuming media that inflames your anxieties and fuels your comparisons? Are you scrolling through feeds designed to trigger your insecurities? Are you watching shows that reinforce the very narratives you're trying to see through? You have a choice about what you let into your mind. Choose content that nourishes clarity and peace, not content that agitates the ego. Fourth is the condition of balanced effort. The Buddha famously taught the middle way, the path between indulgence and asceticism. In the work of letting go, this means finding the effort that is sustained and gentle, not frantic and forceful. It's like tuning a stringed instrument. Too tight and the string snaps. Too loose and it makes no sound. The practice is a continuous, gentle tuning, not a one-time dramatic adjustment. Fifth is the condition of patience and trust. This is the hardest one for the achievement-oriented mind. We want results, and we want them now. We want to be free by Thursday. But the mind doesn't work that way. The seeds you plant today will bear fruit in their own time. You cannot pull up the seedling to check on its roots. Your job is to keep creating the conditions, observing, associating wisely, consuming mindfully, applying balanced effort, and trusting the process. I once heard about a monk who was asked how long it takes to become enlightened. He said, "It takes as long as it takes. If you try to rush, you'll take longer. If you try to force, you'll create obstacles. If you can simply create conditions and let go of the timeline, it might happen tomorrow or it might happen in 20 years. But either way, you'll be at peace because you're no longer measuring your progress. You're just living the practice." This is the freedom the Buddha taught. Not freedom achieved through force, but freedom that emerges when you stop preventing it by creating conditions that naturally allow release. Let me share a story about a man who discovered the power of creating conditions rather than forcing results. He was a software engineer in Silicon Valley, brilliant at what he did, but deeply unhappy. He had tried everything to find peace. Therapy, medications, relationship changes, career moves, expensive retreats, spiritual workshops. Each new thing promised transformation, and each delivered temporary relief followed by the return of his old patterns. He approached spirituality the way he approached coding, as a problem to be solved, a system to be debugged, a goal to be achieved through the right algorithm. He came to a meditation center desperate and skeptical in equal measure. He told the teacher his story, all the techniques he had tried, all the failures he had experienced. He expected the teacher to offer a new technique, a better algorithm, the one thing he hadn't tried yet. Instead, the teacher asked him a question that stopped him cold. What would happen if you stopped trying to fix yourself for 1 year? Not stop practicing, but stop measuring your progress. Stop evaluating whether you're getting better. Stop treating yourself as a project to be completed. Just practice without any agenda, without any goal, without any timeline. The engineer was confused. That made no sense to his achievement-oriented mind. If you're not trying to get better, why practice at all? The teacher smiled and said, maybe you practice because it's worth doing, regardless of what it produces. Maybe you practice because the practice itself is the point. Maybe you've been so focused on the destination that you've never actually been on the journey. The engineer decided to try it as an experiment. For 1 year, he would meditate daily but with absolutely no goal. He wouldn't track his progress. He wouldn't evaluate his sessions as good or bad. He wouldn't compare his current state to his past state or to some imagined future state. He would just sit, every day, with no agenda other than to be present. The first few months were strange. His mind kept wanting to evaluate, to measure, to track. Old habits died hard. But gradually, something shifted. Without the pressure to improve, without the constant self-assessment, his meditation practice became something entirely different. It became a refuge instead of another task. It became a space of freedom instead of another arena for achievement. He started actually enjoying sitting, not because he was getting better at it, but simply because it felt good to stop striving for a little while each day. Near the end of the year, something unexpected happened. He was sitting in his usual morning meditation, not trying to achieve anything, not measuring anything, just being present. And in that ordinary moment, a deep sense of peace arose, unlike anything he had experienced in all his years of striving. It lasted only a few minutes, but it was unmistakable. It wasn't a result he had achieved. It was a gift that arose naturally when he finally stopped trying to force gifts to appear. He later said that this experience taught him more about letting go than any teaching ever had. He saw that all his years of effort had actually been obstacles. He was so busy trying to get somewhere that he never noticed he was already here. The peace he was seeking was not something to achieve. It was something to uncover, something that was already present beneath all the striving, hidden by the very effort to find it. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about the middle way. Not the path of indulgence, not the path of self-mortification, but the path of balanced, sustainable effort. Effort that is present but not grasping. Diligent but not desperate. Consistent but not compulsive. This kind of effort creates conditions for freedom without trying to force freedom into existence. Think about your own practice, whatever form it takes. Are you approaching it as another project to complete, another goal to achieve? Are you measuring your spiritual progress the way you measure your career progress or your fitness progress? If so, you're bringing the same ego structure into the one place that's supposed to free you from ego. You're trying to use the self to transcend the self, and it doesn't work that way. The conditions for letting go are simple but not easy. They require a kind of faith that goes against everything the achievement-oriented mind believes. The faith that you don't have to fix yourself. The faith that peace is already here, hidden beneath the striving. The faith that creating conditions and then letting go is more powerful than any amount of forcing. You can start right now, in this moment. Notice if there's any striving in your mind as you listen to these words. Any trying to get something, to understand something, to achieve something. Just notice it without judgment. And then, for just this moment, let it drop. Let go of the need to get anything from this. Let go of the need to be a good listener or a good practitioner. Just be here, present, aware, with no agenda. That's all. That's enough. Let me end with a story about a man who spent his whole life climbing. He climbed the corporate ladder, climbed social circles, climbed spiritual hierarchies. Each new height brought temporary satisfaction followed by the need to climb higher. He was known among his friends as someone who could never be satisfied, always reaching for the next rung, the next achievement, the next identity. In his 50s, a health crisis forced him to stop. He couldn't work, couldn't socialize, couldn't pursue any of the goals that had driven him for decades. He was confined to a small room, with nothing to do but sit and watch his mind. At first, it was torture. His mind raced with all the things he should be doing, all the goals he was falling behind on, all the identities slipping away. But gradually, something shifted. In the stillness he never would have chosen, he began to notice things he had never seen before. The way light moved across the wall throughout the day. The subtle changes in his own breath. The endless parade of thoughts that came and went like clouds. And beneath all of it, a quiet awareness that was simply watching, simply present, simply at peace. One afternoon, a friend visited and asked him how he was doing. He started to give the usual answer, the performance of being fine, being strong, being positive. Then he stopped. For the first time in his life, he answered honestly. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said. "All the things I used to be, they're gone. And underneath them, there's just this. This quiet. This awareness. It's terrifying and peaceful at the same time." His friend didn't know how to respond. But the man didn't need a response. He had just spoken the most honest words of his life. He had admitted that the self he'd been building and protecting for decades had crumbled, and what remained was not nothing, but something far more real than any of the constructions had ever been. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed to. Not the freedom of becoming someone better, but the freedom of seeing through the someone you thought you had to be. Not the freedom of achieving enlightenment, but the freedom of realizing you were never as unenlightened as you believed. Not the freedom of finding yourself, but the freedom of losing the false self that was hiding the real one. The exhaustion you've carried, the weight of defending an image that was never solid, the burden of measuring up to standards that were never yours, the fatigue of protecting a self that was never real, all of it can rest now. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've seen that there was nothing to figure out. Not because you've become perfect, but because you've seen through the need to be perfect. Think of it this way. You are not the wave. You are the ocean. The wave rises, has its moment, and crashes back into the vastness. It spends its entire existence trying to be a good wave, trying to be bigger than other waves, trying to avoid crashing. But all along, it was never separate from the ocean. Its true nature was always water, always vast, always one with the whole. You are the same. The person you think you are, the one with the history and the personality and the preferences, that's just a wave on the surface of your being. Beneath it, there's the vast ocean of awareness itself. And that ocean has never been threatened. It has never needed defense. It has never been diminished by any wave, no matter how high or low. As you rest here now, in these final moments, see if you can feel that ocean beneath the waves of your own thoughts. Feel the awareness that has been present your entire life, watching everything change, never changing itself. That's what you are. Not the ever-changing content of experience, but the ever-present context in which experience happens. The performance can stop now. The comparison can stop. The defending can stop. Not because you've achieved some special state, but because you've seen that the one who was performing, comparing, and defending was never really you. It was just a character, a role, a wave on the surface of something infinitely vaster. Just rest here. Just breathe. Just be. Thank you for spending this time with us at Monk's Moon Temple. May the peace that has always been here reveal itself to you, in every moment, in every breath.